Hello and welcome to an Infinity the Game battle report. Today we're playing the Morat Aggression Force against the Onyx Contact Force, and the scenario is Mothball. Now, Mothball is a custom scenario written as part of the Mothball Incident unofficial global campaign. If you remember Operation Hungry Wars from last year, it's being run by the same guys, the A Tale of Miniatures and Dice crew. If you're interested in taking part in the Mothball incident, I'll put links to both the Facebook event page and the campaign page proper, which has got a jumping off into their Discord if you want to participate. These guys are big supporters of the channel, and it's the least I can do to give them a shout out and see how their custom game plays. Now, kind of in stark contrast to the official global campaigns, the vibe I get from these guys is pretty chill. The emphasis is fun and we're not playing for sheep stations, and in that vein, I've got a few things in this Morat list that might look a little bit at odds with my recent Morat Aggression Force faction focus. Now, we're beginning the list with the Sogarat Feuerback Lieutenant. That's not weird. He is, in my opinion, probably the best lieutenant in the faction. This guy is basically a tag lieutenant in his own right. Fantastic piece. The next thing we have is the bull track. Now, I am a little bit outspoken against the bull track, and let me kind of explain why, because I didn't during the Morat video. Now, the reason why I think the bull track is kind of bad is that he's armor 5. On a 69 nice point tag, that's just not an acceptable attribute. Yes, he has immunity armor, but that's not the same. So he has immunity AP, but that isn't the same as immunity armor. And he's very ballistic skill 13. And just generally what you get is mostly mediocre, except he is, if nothing else, mobile. Super jump on a 6/4 piece is good. And if you think of him almost purely as an active turn, mobile, very expensive kind of vehicle that is at least much, much more durable than vehicles, there is no reason why you can't get some use out of a bull track. That's not why I hate the bull track. I hate the bull track because I played him back when he was Silhouette 6, and then the sculptors at Corvus Belli fucked him up and catfished me. It is my opinion that everyone is allowed to have at least one model or profile that they just hate without having to explain, but for the sake of an explanation, that's why I hate the bull track. It's actually personal. I really enjoyed playing him when he was Silhouette 6, and there is so much of a difference between moving a Silhouette 6 Super Jump tag and a Silhouette 7 Super Jump tag in terms of where you can go, the moves you can make, where you can end up. The play experience with the Silhouette 6 bull track back in N4 for the month before its model came out was really, really nice, and that was taken off the fuck away from me. Now, despite that, okay, this is a profile that we can at least get some play out of. It is unfair of me to just never use it at all, and so we're using it in at least one battle report so that the people who get angry at me every time I say I hate the bull track can at least see that I have played it, and also hear this explanation for why I hate the bull track. Now, the next two pieces in this list actually do require a little bit of explanation and a retraction from me. I got these guys really wrong in the Morat video, and that was just because of a fairly simple misunderstanding. A misunderstanding that comes from listening people and not going and checking things. The specific root of my misunderstanding was that when N5 dropped, about 3 different people told me, boarding pistol is just a chain colt. Now, the template mode of a boarding pistol is absolutely just a chain colt, but they also have a direct fire mode, and I just didn't know that. And it's been 8 months of this edition, and it was actually very, very good player Lobo who made a comment against the video and said, you know, they have a direct fire mode, right? That caused me to go and look at them, and so I have significantly reevaluated them. Drop suit Tariots are really, really good, you guys, like really good. Now, I think my preferred profile generally is going to be the Ballistic Skill Attack +1 Burst profile, just for landing and making a mess. They've got a long leash with base movement of 6 inches plus super jump jet propulsion. They are dogged with remote presence, so they are almost impossible to put down in one ARO volley, and being able to fire off a combination of 2 Morat templates or 2 boarding pistol templates, and fork that if your opponent dodges with a burst 3 damage 7 boarding pistol, that's just a combi rifle at short range, but it is still a burst 3 shot you can fire against someone taking a dodge. That's just generally a fantastic piece for 16 points to just go and make a mess. Now, in this particular scenario, Mothball, I'm taking the paramedic because that's a profile that's very useful in this scenario. We'll talk through the scenario at the beginning of deployment, but in short, there are a bunch of hazardous zones that inflict damage against BTS that you need to enter and then make rolls with specialists just as a kind of precursor to playing the game. And in that circumstance, there is no specialist bonus in this scenario. You may have to brute force it. I want to have a dogged BTS 6 specialist, and that's the drop suit Tariot. There is also an exclusion zone, which means I can land the drop suit automatically very close to the zone, and I'm basically one order away, one jump away from entering the zone or touching the zone, making an order, and beginning to scan the MAZ zones, which are part of the scenario. So I'm taking one of each of the drop suits because the paramedic is a really good addition to this scenario, but I think it's the ballistic skill attack +1 burst that would be my go-to and will be finding its way into a lot of my Morat lists moving forward. For the rest of the list, it's basically just stuff that I am taking as a concession to the fact that my first two models are a Sogarat and a Bulltrack. We've got a couple that are Arazi, we've got an Osnat team, one Predator and two Garkis. We have a very scuffed and cheap Morat Vanguard Ballistic Skill Attack +/-3 heavy machine gun duoed with a Dartok. We've got a Tactical Awareness M-Drone, also just kind of as a concession to this scenario. I really did not want to get locked out of the scenario without at least a couple of ways to scan those zones, ideally with at least BTS 3. I didn't want to do things like walk Dartox all the way forward, so a tack-aware M-Drone, even though it's very much not ideal, is quick enough to at least move forward and give me one or two chances to scan a zone in order to just kind of play the game. We've then got a Datarazi and an Ikadron. The Ikadron is there so I can reload both the Dartok and the Sogaran. Now, is this a list that I would recommend people play either for this scenario or in general? No, I don't recommend the bull track, but we are not playing for sheep stations here, and this did all look like it was going to be really quite fun. Now, playing against me today, going to have one of my regular opponents, my Onyx opponent, Owen. Now, Owen is something of a tragic when it comes to combined army. He has two painted Zeodrons that he really likes to use, and a painted Kodali, which he really likes to use. It is not good to use those things. They are not fantastic, but there is a little bit of merit in maybe a single Zeodron. All you need to get duo bonuses with an Umbra Samaritan is a Zeodron and a singular Umbra. That gives the Zeodron +1 special die. It's a tactical awareness order to move the Umbra around. 50 points is still pretty damn expensive for a +1 special die K1 marksman rifle strapped to a relatively mediocre tag chassis. But it graduates from actively way too many points for what you're paying up to this is playable. There are worse ways to spend 92 points than a Zeodron of your choice and an Umbra Samaritan. We've then got Norkias. He's actually going to be free running in this particular scenario. He's an NCO. He could join that team as a Haris team, but he also runs solo totally fine. And this is a scenario in which you potentially need to cover a fair bit of ground early in the game and then relocate a fair bit of force later in the game. We'll talk about that as we get into the scenario description. Now, those are also a bunch of quite expensive things, which means that the rest of Owen's list is pretty thin on the ground. This is only a 12 trooper list. It's got a couple of Imitrons, a Noctifer, which is good, Bit and Kiss, and then a Unidron fire team. Now, there are a few things we could absolutely do to improve this, in which we kind of should. If we were going to play this list again, here's how we should change this. The first thing is that fire team has got way too many dead orders if Bin Kiss goes down. Those guys are going to be passive a lot of the time, and so we should pretty much consolidate most of the list here into a singular group. The Zeodron, Norkias, and the Umbra Samaritan should just all be hanging out in that big combat group, and you could maybe consider moving Bit and Kiss into a secondary group where they can just spend a few orders every turn. Another thing we should do is we should absolutely trim down that Unidron team. Now, being immune to smoke shooting is really, really good, but this list is running some really, really elite pieces. As a result, we can and should just pad the order pool out a little bit more. Take the Nexus hacker and turn him into just a regular Nexus. There is no chain of command here. And while I am not totally afraid to make my lieutenant vulnerable in that kind of situation, the Nexus is a little bit too vulnerable. Like, I would be willing to run Norkias as a lieutenant and just kind of hope that he survives. It's not ideal, but it is a consideration, but that Nexus is a bit too easy to reach out to with pitches and take attacks against. Turn him into a specialist, then he's basically very hard to kill. He's hanging out with the Unidron. That frees up some points. If we trim some of the Unidrons down from being specialists, we should at least be able to get points for a Flash Pulse bot. Maybe if we trim trim a Unidron in its entirety, we could potentially also get something like, for example, 2 Icodrons. Icodron synergize with Bit and Kiss, they would add enough orders into Combat Group 2 that you could have a Combat Group 2 that is just Bit and Kiss, actually with orders to run around and just throw out pitches as their entire reason for being. And then you've got effectively 12 orders in the primary combat group to wash through the Zeodron, the Samaritan, and Norkias. Now, Owen would do a really good job working with relatively limited resources just with the Zeodron, Norkias, and the Umbra. They could have been much more efficient in this particular game. That's just something to bear in mind. Basically, a good rule of thumb, literally any time you have a large and relatively static link team, is to have as many outlets as possible for the orders that link team generates, because a large link team like that comprised of 4/4 models is often just not going to be moving around particularly much, and so is just likely to not spend its orders in many given turns. Now, into the game, and let's talk about how Mothball as a scenario plays. Firstly, we have an exclusion zone. It is 8 inches either side of the center of the table, so a large exclusion zone. And then there are 3 MAZ zones, which are just QAZ zones, if you're familiar with those. They're across the center of the table, here, here, and here. They are dangerous terrain, 0G terrain, and saturation zones. Sorry, not dangerous terrain, as they are anyone that walks into them, right? You contact them, you will stop unless you have 0G terrain. Anyone that performs a short skill or an action while inside one of the MAZ zones takes a hit with a PS of 10. Now that's very, very low in terms of damage. It's very easy to survive that. For example, a model with BTS3 needs to roll a 13 or less to survive, but it can still do damage and you cannot sit inside those things for terribly long. You will nevertheless be required to, because the goal of the scenario is to move models into base contact with or inside an MAZ zone and attempt to scan them. That is an unmodified whip roll, and because it involves being in or in contact with an MAZ zone, it means you're going to take damage. Have to make saves against that damage 10. When you successfully scan a zone, which you don't get scenario points for, just by the way, you then roll a d20 with a high chance of revealing an MAZ creature, which is just a QAZ creature, and a low chance of revealing the Mothball, which is the scenario objective. MAZ creatures can be fought and killed just like QAZ creatures and are worth 1 scenario point each. But the real prize is the Mothball, which will always be revealed if you don't find it in the first 2 zones that you scan, which is likely. Usually the first 2 zones you will scan because of the d20 roll. Very high chance of an MAZ creature, very low chance of the Mothball. When the Mothball actually drops, it's now an active scenario element. It can be picked up by any trooper without spending needing to make a roll, just by spending a short skill. And once a mothball is in a trooper's possession, it is expended and removed automatically each time that trooper performs any skill that requires a roll. Using the mothball is automatic, it can't be avoided, and it gives that roll reroll, which means that you can reroll any dice from that roll, which is very powerful. And using the mothball awards 1 scenario point. You can score a maximum of 5 scenario points this way, which means that as soon as the mothball is in play, it becomes a real fight over wherever it is on the table. Now, when a model uses the mothball, it is placed like it's left. It leaves their possession and is placed anywhere inside their zone of control, but it can never leave the exclusion zone. Effectively, it can never leave that portion of the table 8 inches either side of the center zone. So even when you grab it and hold it and try and use it, it is always going to return to this central area, right? 8 inches either side. After you use it, or after you try and leave the zone and drop the mothball, your opponent places it anywhere inside zone of control of the trooper that was carrying it, so your opponent gets to place it each time it is used. That makes it a real back and forth fight. It is, unless like there's a totally uncontested part of the table where you don't have any troops and your opponent has found the mothball and is just playing around with it, it will be very contested and very back and forth, because dropping a like you placing the mothball in zone of control of your opponent's model after they use the mothball, you will do your damnedest to put it in a position where your opponent can't easily get it again that turn. That makes it difficult to score multiple points quickly up to that maximum of 5, which means that Quite Live is the 3rd scenario objective, which is to be the person holding the mothball at the end of the game. Now that's also quite difficult unless you are the second player, because remember, anytime you declare an order or a skill that would cause you to roll dice, you utilize the Mothball and then drop the Mothball. Now, there's a tiny little bit of ambiguity in the scenario, but how my opponent and I chose to read that is that that does not apply to just making defense rolls. It has to be the declaration of an order or a skill, but that for the purposes of this, an ARO counts as an order. That will score you the points, but basically once a model is holding the Mothball, if it wants to hang on to it, it's defenseless. If you want the Mothball to not leave your possession, you need to not declare anything, and if you don't declare anything, then you're effectively going to get shot for free. And that will come up in a kind of interesting way toward the end of the scenario. So basically we have the opening phase of the scenario where people run in, try and scan the zones, kill the creatures, and then the end phase of the scenario where people are scrambling over this Butterfingers Mothball, trying to grab it and use it, and then they have to drop it, and then try and grab it again, and that tends to be the culmination of the game. Now, I win the Lieutenant role here, it's 13 versus 13, and because of how it feels like those last 3 points for holding the Mothball at the end of the game is going to be decisive, I choose to set up second on the right side of the table. Now, my opponent Owen has given some thought to this scenario, and so he's not too bad off going first. He would have liked to have gone second. He's not going to give me deployment advantage and first turn, though. He would like to have gone second because he also wants to hold it at the end of the game, and it's easiest to do so as the second player. But he's got a little bit of a plan for going first, and it revolves around those Umbra Samaritans and Norcaius. Now, in terms of Owen's deployment, the big Unidron Link team is going to be in and around this building here. The sniper is the important piece, and it is standing on this position like this high elevated ground with fairly good fields of fire. It can't really see through the midfield. There's enough line of sight blocking here that its line of sight terminates watching this Mothball zone over here, but it's got fairly good coverage of this region and a little bit of crossfire down into these approaches into Owen's half of the table, if need be. So that's a bunch of things sitting around there. The Icadrons, so the Imitrons have all landed fairly safely. Bit and Kiss are deployed centrally, and then we have, as his reserve drops, we had the Norcaius and the Zeodron. The Umbra Samaritan has deployed prone up on this rooftop. Now, the reserve drops are going to end up being Norcaius deploying here behind this sign. I've just realized, sorry, there is a very small thing that was wrong with the list that was shown off. I didn't get out to reconstitute it. Please disregard the fact that there were some forward observers there. Some of the pieces were cut. Owen definitely had a war correspondent. I've just remembered that now because the war correspondent was hanging out down behind here in this game. He's going to be in the first combat group, and he will be providing orders and doing some things over the course of the game. My mistake, I just rebuilt the list from memory, forgot about the war correspondent. Now we're going to end up with, yep, the war correspondent over here. Whoops, we're going to have the Umbra Samaritan and the Zeodron up on this sort of top side of the table, able to move up and around this area here, and then Norcaius able to move either out into the center or around toward Owen's right flank to approach either of those MAZ zones. For my part, I've set up sort of as best of a defensive cordon as I can, with the note that you do not under any circumstances really want to use the bull track as an ARO piece. Some other tags have that luxury, but the bull track is very fragile, especially against all of the plasma that my opponent has on the side of the table. Now, I also think there's obviously a little bit of K1 that's doing the rounds as well. The bull track was my reserve, so I did get to see the K1 marksman rifle and K1 combi of the Zeodron and Norcaius. Now, the Bulltrack is obviously not specially vulnerable to K1. It has exactly the same armor as every other tag when a K1 round hits it. Technically, it's kind of efficient against K1 rounds, but I still don't want to expose my tag to K1 rounds, and I absolutely don't want to expose my armor 5 tag to plasma rounds. So it is hanging back and being sort of as safe as it can, but it does have some crossfire across this angle. The Bulltrack you can see is hanging out down here. But because I do have to have the Bulltrack fairly far back and treat it more like a vehicle than a tag, my AR options with this list are fairly limited. But we do have the Soggerat in a relatively aggressive ARO position. He is just at silhouette 5, a tiny bit taller than this sign that he is behind, and so he actually has some fairly commanding sightlines. He can see down sort of in this section toward this MAZ zone. He's actually got a line through the 2 buildings here that's relevant. He can see not quite all of this zone, but a portion of it as well, and he has a bit of a punching fire line down through the center. There is just enough of a gap between these 2 acrylic signs here and here for him to see through. So he is actually my major ARO piece, and only Morats would use their Lieutenant with no chain of command as a major ARO piece, but it is an option that we have. Otherwise, we're going to just have Datarazi scattered throughout the deployment zones. One will be up here, one will be hanging out down here, one will be down like here and here. They're just all over the place. The Osnat and her Preta team will be guarding the Soggerat, spread out to try and avoid templates. And then we have the Dartok on the ground level, that's a Dadarazi. The Gartok is going to be at ground level behind this building, and then the heavy machine gun is behind this sign, looking to potentially take an early engagement against the Plasma Sniper, because, yeah, that's not the worst face-to-face roll in the world, and it's the kind of thing I wanted to test the Vanguard against. Now, Owen's going first, and because of his group setup, I have a little bit of a suspicion that there's some random bullshit hiding somewhere, and as a result, I stripped one order from each combat group, although had I known the full identity of his list, I probably would have pretty comfortably stripped the orders from Justin Orcaius, the Samaritan, and the Zeodron, but as noted, the list would be performing better if everything was consolidated, and you had a group 2 of just a few orders, Bit and Kiss, the Noctifer, and a War Correspondent. Like, that would be a solid group 2 to support the primary group 1, but we'll work on that in future list iterations. Now, as I mentioned, Owen has a plan for going first in this scenario, and that plan is very contingent on the fact that QAZ or MAZ creatures have a Vita attribute. And that means that for everyone else, they are kind of annoyances that have to be dealt with, but for Norcaius, they are a packed lunch. And so while it takes a little bit of dodging and a little bit of cautious movement, the bulk of Owen's first turn is spent with Norcaius coming out and around here, up towards this MAZ zone, scans it successfully and kills the MAZ creature, dodges clear of the Sogarat, jumps down here, scans and clears this MAZ zone, kills the creature inside, and then jumps back up and is going to end up hanging, has to dodge past again, going to end up prone, hanging up sort of in this nook behind these two buildings, full to bursting of MAZ creatures. That scores Owen 2 scenario points and means that Norcaius is now a 3 wound, no wound incapacitation hacker, and both of these MAZ zones are gone. He's also going to have just enough orders after converting the Warcor's irregular order and using tactical awareness to move the Zeodron and the Samaritan kind of up and around. There is a very brief attempt or consideration of an engagement against the Sogarat, but to do so, where the position of the tag is would be in like a long-range face-to-face roll up here, and so kind of just doesn't particularly bother. He's also content to let me be the one to waste orders scanning the last MAZ zone, and so just positions to be able to take advantage of he's got forces in the area where he now knows the Mothball is going to be. Now, one of the problems with his list construction, as we noted, is that there's just now a whole bunch of dead orders waiting to be spent and no way to spend them because there's nothing for this Unidron team to see, but Bit and Kiss are going to move out, up and around, spend some orders, lay some repeaters, and they're going to end up just sort of like nooked into this position here and here, able to do something in subsequent turns, or as it happens to be a little bit of a target for me. They would be much better off just spending a few orders from a more passive position and then reloading with an Nicodron baggage bot, and I think I've criticized Owen's list construction enough at this point. So, in terms of a first turn, Owen has not done any damage to me. That's kind of a problem. However, he has scored 2 scenario points, which is a fairly big deal. Now, jumping into my first turn, there are a few things that I know I'm going to want to accomplish. I'm going to want to try and deal with this Unidron. I'm going to want to deal with Norcaius. Norcaius especially is very important to engage because he is juiced to the gills right now. If I do not go after him in my active turn, he will begin his turn, he will have effectively 4 wounds to spend, and there is almost no defensive cordon that I can put up that he can't punch through under those circumstances and basically go on a rampage. So he has to die. Him sitting there in that position is a lost condition for me right now unless I deal with him. We would also really like to scan, crack open, and grab the Mothball inside this MAZ zone, which we will have the orders to do, and so that's going to be another thing that's on the menu. So how do we accomplish this turn? Well, to start with, we do a little bit of Impetuous, none of it is hugely relevant, and then we're going to spool up that Morat Vanguard HMG. He rounds the corner, he takes a face-to-face roll with the Unidron, and he does actually what I had kind of hoped he would do, which is put the Unidron into Dogged. He actually rolls really, really well. He scores 2 crits and a hit, and the Ballistic Skill Attack -3 means the Unidron, who actually might have crit in return, doesn't. It's a really big deal. And it was really cool to see some validation of the Vanguard Infantry Morat as, like, I had hoped it would work as a bit of a budget Rampart sweeper, and it kind of did. Now, once the Unidron has gone Dogged, or rather, sorry, if it had gone Dogged, I would probably have hesitated to engage it again, but it did not go Dogged. Instead, Owen elected to allow it to go unconscious because he had Speedball to cool down. I'm pretty much fine with that, but I think Owen is as well. I think as a rule of thumb, you do want to maximize the effect of Dogged on your Unidrons, but saving that for a turn 2, bring it back with a Speedball. Even if the Speedball is to miss the drop, there's plenty of things around here that could easily recover that Unidron. I think that's probably the sensible decision, and it's the correct one. But in this case, we are now free, weapons free to go and engage Norcaius, or so I think. All right, out comes the bull track. It's nice and fast. It's not going to be able to make much use of its super jump because it does have to move kind of in straight lines. It isn't jet propulsion, but it's going to move up and around, and oh, whoops, there's a Noctifer. And in fact, as I am moving across this position here, across this line, I get a line on Norkias, and Owen does the correct thing. He waits for the Noctifer to reveal until there are multiple AROs incoming. The Noctifer is standing on these stairs here. It was not quite able to see the Morat Vanguard, and it fires a missile into the bull track in the open. I actually have to split my burst fairly aggressively here. I put, I think, 2 shots into the Noctifer and 3 into Norkias. Kind of hilariously, because I have immunity armor piercing, the AP missile coming my way, I mean, it's still scary, but I have a fairly reasonable chance of surviving it. But if Norkias flash pulses me, which is what his ARO is, I am not going to have as easy a chance to go after him with basically anything else this turn. I cannot get into him in close combat because he's just better than everything I have in close combat. So I have to put him down, and that means I have to not get flash pulsed. Now, the Noctifer does connect. I miss with the bull track, unsurprisingly, automatism 6, and I take, I want to say, 1 wound from the missile hit. There's just a fairly good defense roll. And I put 1 wound on Norkias back. Now, with that move, at least we have gotten out of the Noctifer's line of sight, so we're able to just take a few more engagements against Norkias. He's a little bit helpless against Enfilade fire here. There's really nowhere that he can guts in this position, and so I think 2 face-to-face rolls later, and despite the fact that he has 4 now down to 3 wounds, he does go down against the bull track, and that's really, really significant, because as noted, had I left him alive in active turn with like any Prothean wound markers, he was probably going to punch a massive hole in my lines. Now, if I want to engage the Noctifer, now's probably the time as well, and really the only model I have in my list that can do that is, yep, it's the bull track. Had I not been running the bull track and instead had some of my usual stuff, I'd have a bunch of Noctifers. Those Noctifers would not Noctifers, a bunch of Yaugats. Those Yaugats would be very clean answers to the Noctifers, but the bull track is what I've got, so the bull track is what I'll use. It does at least have shock ammunition, and moving up and around into this cover here actually gets the Noctifer inside 24 inches, and after like 1 face-to-face roll, actually, the bull track puts the Noctifer down. So that's a really, really good first turn already just in terms of attrition. I've knocked a Unitron unconscious, and I've killed Norkias and a Noctifer, and that's just a ton of my opponent's points dead, thanks to the bull track. Now from here, it's on to the next portion of our plan. We do not have terribly many orders left in the first group, but we do have some, and so we use the border skirmishers rule and the exclusion zone to land the paramedic down here, the paramedic dropsuit Tariot. It moves into base contact with the MAZ zone, doesn't take any damage, but it does, no, sorry, it does take damage. It fails its save and goes dogged, but it does successfully scan the zone. No problem with that. Was, I mean, it sucks. That's a BTS 6 model. I rolled an 18 to save. I needed to roll a 17, 18, 19, or 20 to fail, but it is a thing that happens. But we do successfully scan the zone, reveal the Mothball, move forward and grab the Mothball, and with the very small number of remaining orders that we have, we use a coordinated order to grab the Mothball, which will get a few other things like move the Datarazi into safer positions, etc. And then we just run an attack, bit, and kiss with the data, with the drop suit. We have to roll a dice to trigger the Mothball, so the template fork my opponent isn't scared of. But it turns out even an AP submachine gun, when you have reroll as a modifier, is very dangerous, and so the drop suit puts her down dead before it itself expires. When it uses the Mothball, it gets flung towards my opponent's side of the field, where it'll be very easy for him to pick up in a subsequent turn, but I'm at least on the board now. I've scored 1 point by using the Mothball, and while my opponent has 2 points from killing the MAZ creatures, all I'm really going to need to do now is survive, and unless I give my opponent loads and loads of chances to use the Mothball, I will be able to hopefully win the game by getting that like the last 3 points from holding it. Now, because we took no damage in our first turn, we do still have some orders left, and so we're going to just use those last couple of orders in the second combat group to move the Dartok up and around now that the line is clear. He's going to throw a pitcher down and land it right next to my opponent's hacker. That will give me 2 orders to attempt a Trinity against the Nexus Operative, but I don't get it through. He's able to either reset or in one case pass. I think he passes 4 BTS rolls over the course of that assassination run, but he does survive. It is what it is. It was an extremely worthwhile effort, but I did not get the kill. As noted, if we cut the hacker off of the Nexus Operative and just made it into a Specialist Operative, that would not have been a line of play for me, but I probably would still have fired that pitcher down there because it would make life awkward for all of those Unitrons. Now at that stage, we've got basically no orders left. We are able to put the the bull track into suppressive fire, and we use, this is a little bit of a case of orders burning a hole in my pocket. We use the tactical awareness order to move the M drone up and around to here. This is frankly not a good position for it, but it's not going to get punished. It's not going to get punished mostly due to luck. Now, this is the turn in which the disorganization in Owen's combat groups is really going to cause him grief, because their Bit and Kiss are dead, and there's just nothing really to spend orders on in the second combat group, but that is still where the bulk of the orders are. He is going to call down the speedball, it's going to land successfully, and after 3 orders of movement basically to move around and then move back with the and stay prone and everything with this team, he's going to recover the Unidron Plasma Sniper, which will then rejoin the team automatically in the states phase. But that's basically all this team gets to do. If he wanted to move the Umbra Samaritan and the Zeodron into this team, he'd have to break the link, because you move them sort of like sequentially. It breaks the link when a model moves combat groups, it leaves a link. You cannot move a link wholesale, and because he called down a speedball and reserved 2 troopers, he's only got 2 command tokens left, and he wants to keep those models linked. Now that's going to result in a little bit of order wastage, and I think what he does instead, just in order to make sure that at least some of those orders get spent, is he actually flips the war correspondent into the combat group with the Unidron. So they're going to do their stuff, they're going to recover the Unidron Plasma Sniper, and then with the spare orders, this war correspondent is actually going to run up and around this way, grab the mothball, which has ended up dropping down here, and just run forward. Basically, he's just going to end up in this position here, or he's going to run back a little bit even, because I'm going to go after it, and he's going to declare dodge or flash pulse or something in his turn. Which, even just as long as you are holding the mothball, you're going to be able to declare an ARO, and by declaring an ARO, you're going to be able to use the mothball, which will score a point. So by being able to just grab that mothball, hey, that's some points in the bag, which is necessary because there's just not too much that can be done with the Samaritan and the Zeodron, not yet. They will do some movement up and around, but as you may recall, the big guy, the Sogarat, has this narrow line down through here. And because of that narrow line, and because Onyx doesn't have access, or at least this list does not have access to things like disco balls, he can't really block that line of sight. And so he has to just weather through it, taking face-to-face rolls at awkward ranges. He does, at one point during the turn, right before the Warcore makes its run, he is able to grab the Mothball with the Zeodron, move up and take a face-to-face roll using reroll, and even at bad range, where the Zeodron is on 7s and the Sogarat is on 13s, reroll is a really good rule. And I think I did something like I roll like a 10, which he can't beat, but he just rerolls everything fishing for crits, gets a crit, and actually does 1 wound, so it doesn't kill, but does a wound to the Sogarat. Now, when he uses the Mothball, I fling it all the way forward into kind of like this position here. That's what causes the war correspondent to have to make its run. But ideally, there would have just been a lot more orders to reposition, right? This team really want to be able to doing a lot more than it is, even if it's just something like the Umbra Samaritan sneaks forward, right? The Umbra Samaritan has the potential to crack open. It's not Norcaius, but it's very, very close. It's as dangerous just about in close combat. It has the same potential to crack open a deployment zone as Norcaius does. It's just all of this is being a little bit shackled by particularly the orders that they have access to. Now, at this point, Owen is still winning. He has the 2 points for the MAZ creatures. He has the 1 point for the Mothball that he's used this turn, and he's about to get another point, right? Because in my turn, I'm going to go after that War Correspondent. That will put him on 4. But the clock is ticking, particularly in terms of that last turn holding the Mothball 3 points. Now, as we jump into my second turn, as a little bit of a saving grace, one thing that is in Owen's favor is that quite a lot of my force is concentrated in the bull track, and it is as far as it is possible to be away from where the action is now happening. And for the rest of the game, the action will be happening in this part of the table, because that's where the Mothball is. And so one of the interesting things, if you're playing this scenario as part of the Mothball incident, one of the things that's worth having in lists is the ability to reallocate force if you think you need to. If you've got something like a tag, be prepared to potentially have to spend a bunch of orders, because inevitably now, this is where the fight will be. I'm going to need to move the bull track or something else. But we will have some things else to use here. Now, the first thing we will try and do is use the Vanguard infantry as we did before to try and put down the Unidron, but this time his luck will not hold. The Unidron scores a hit, he just whiffs all of the rolls, he is ballistic skill 11. He goes unconscious but not dead. We'll recover him later in the turn with a speedball, but his part in the game will now be done. The bull track will move up and around instead, and after a couple of back and forth engagements, it will this time put the Unidron dogged. There's no reason for it to go unconscious because there's no engineer. It went unconscious last turn rather than dogged because there was the speedball to use. And I am not willing to fight a dogged Unidron any more than I have to, so that's also going to kind of just end the bull track's involvement in the game. It's going to end up basically sitting in this position, and it's going to be there for the rest of the game because I've got other stuff that has to be done. Now, in terms of the upper section of the battlefield up here, we've got another drop suit to call in, and so that's going to be what's going to be doing the bulk of the action in this turn. We're going to move the M drone up first because we have to kill a war correspondent, and reroll is actually going to let it survive the first face-to-face roll using reroll on its flash pulse. We'll put it down on the second order. And then in order to go after the Mothball, we're going to actually use smoke from the OSNAT, basically just to smoke out all of this space. Because there are pieces up there, there's a potential ARO fire from the Zeodron. I want to be able to just do that nice and cleanly, so we smoke that place out, and then we land with the second drop suit Tariot in basically the same place as the first. It's going to move up and grab the Mothball, and because I have to spend it to score any scenario points, it's going to come around and launch an attack on the Umbra Samaritan and the Zeodron. Now, for the first engagement, because I really have to roll dice, and Owen knows that, he's going to respond with ballistic skill attacks. I'm going to fire my boarding pistols, I'm going to spray a bunch of shots, burst 3, and that is going to be totally ineffective other than scoring me a scenario point. I even go dogged. Unfortunately, I'm not able to beat the Zeodron's heavy pistol in a face-to-face roll, and I have to put more of my dice into the Umbra because it's firing a +1 special dice plasma carbine at me, and that will potentially kill me if it scores a hit. Well, it won't kill me, I've got a remote presence dogged model, but it poses the greatest risk. Right? The potential for death is if the Zeodron hits and the Umbra Samaritan hits. Because of the extra damage from the Umbra Samaritan, that's the one I put my extra dice into. I split 2 and 1, but I go dogged anyway. But I do use the Mothball, which gives me my second point of the game. Now, with the Mothball dropped, I've got no particular chance of grabbing it. I could run over and grab it. It's going to end up next to the Zeodron. I could run over and grab it with the drop suit, but then he would just get shot and die because it's a short skill to pick it up. So instead, I'm just going to activate again since I'm dogged, and this time we're going to fling out Morats. My opponent will shoot me again. I will fire off Morats into both of those 2 targets. That's really good, turns out. And while the drop suit will die, he will successfully isolate the Umbra Samaritan. The Zeodron will make both of its saves. Now, at that point in the turn, we're basically tapped out. We have some orders to spend, but not resources in place to do anything with them. So we're just going to move a bunch of stuff forward. We're going to move the Sogarat forward off of the building in order to basically find a position where you can do things next turn. We're going to recover the Morat Vanguard infantry by crawling over and using a auto medkit. But apart from setting up for a final turn push, there's not really anything else that I can do this turn. So you'll see here the Sogarat has moved forward, it's hanging out in this position. The M drone is in this position where it had killed the war correspondent, prone and being a repeater. There's some Datarazi forward, etc. as well. And basically everyone is converging on this part of the table, and the same is going to be true for Owen. He doesn't have a ton of orders left, but he's still got some. There is still the Tactical Awareness Order, there's the Ichadrons, etc., but with the Umbra isolated, quite a lot of the threat on that part of the table has dispersed. Owen is going to attempt a reset with the Umbra but fail, and so that's basically going to leave the Zeodron just to grab the button, grab the Mothball, and attempt to hold it against all odds. That means the Unidron's moving out as well, so they're going to push over in this position and attempt to reinforce where all of this action is happening. To do that, they're going to have to walk through Bulltrack AROs, but they just move as a link team. I'm going to put the Nexus Operative down. He will die to a HRMC ARO, but his death means that the rest of the team moves up and around, and so everyone is converging on this location. We will end up with the Zeodron way back here holding the Mothball, and everything is on for a final turn showdown. Now, as a reminder, at this point in the game, Owen's used the Mothball twice, I've used the Mothball twice, and Owen has killed 2 MAZ creatures, which means the score is 4-2. And Owen runs the math in his head and is going to do something interestingly cunning this turn. Now, I am going to collapse in with everything just like he has, but my goal here is to try and force him to use an arrow with the Zeodron and drop the Mothball, because if he uses it, yes, he'll score a point, he'll go to 5, but then I can grab it. And what I can actually do is I can grab it, I can run away, I can use a short skill, and I can use a short skill somewhere where it will be easy enough, no matter where he places it, for me to recover it. And so what he's going to do instead is something that's quite cunning. Now, my first plan is I'm going to lay down a bunch of smoke, because there are Unidrons everywhere now, like staring into this area. We're going to lay down smoke with the Osnat, we're going to smoke out this entire area, and we're going to use the M drone to come forward. The M drone is going to come forward, I'm going to start attempting to possess the Zeodron. And the cunning thing that Owen does here is nothing. He just lets me attempt to possess it, because there's a couple of different outcomes here. The first possible outcome is that I just fail and I spend all of these orders attempting to possess the Zeodron, and it's still in his control, and then I have to go after and kill it while there's smoke everywhere. That's going to be a real challenge, and that potentially results in him just holding the Mothball. The second thing that happens is that I could potentially succeed. I could take over the Zeodron. But at that point, it's model under my control. Yes, I can then use the Mothball, but doing so lets him place it. I think, just doing the math here, I'm pretty sure he's actually on 5 points. I'm trying to remember how. It's very possible I think he's actually used the Mothball 3 times, because there was at least once with the Zeodron, at least once with the War Correspondent, and he must have used another point this game, because I knew that I couldn't just grab it and hold it. I needed to use it once this turn as well, which is why this play made sense. So there will have been a point at some point during the game. And so I'm just barreling total control attempts into this Zeodron, and I think he makes 6 saves before eventually I push one through and I take over the Zeodron. I activate it, try and spend an order. I actually just shoot the Umbra Samaritan, who has been trying and failing to reset all of this time, and Owen flings the Mothball onto the roof of this building, but ultimately, look, there was nowhere really that he could put it with something from getting to it. There's that Arise hanging out back here. It has enough orders to come up and over the bridge, throw some smoke, and pick up the Mothball. So look, it was a very worthy effort, and the line of play that would have resulted in Owen winning the game is just the Zeodron face tanking a bunch of rolls. You never want to really be in that position, but he did correctly identify the out and line of play, even if in the end it was a bit of a bridge too far to try and have a piece survive that many rolls before the end of the game. And so that wraps up our game of Mothball. The final score would be something like 6-5 my way, so a very, very close win to the Morat aggression force, but ultimately decided by the fact that there are a lot of points on the line at the end of the game, and there's no real way to get the Mothball out of this big central zone. In terms of play experience, it was a fun scenario. I think now that I've played it, and I was asked for feedback by the guys before they went live with this, and I thought it looked pretty promising. Now that I've actually played it, I do kind of think one change that I might consider making, if I was to play this or to include this in an event myself, something like that, is I would consider changing the points just a little bit. Have 4 points on the line for using the Mothball, because using it 5 times is going to be a challenge over the course of the game. Don't put any points for killing MAZ creatures. Instead, put 3 points, 1 each for scanning the MAZ zones. Couple of reasons why I think that might slightly improve the game. The first is it's really, really easy for the second player, if they're just not dead, to secure the Mothball at game end unless their opponent has an overwhelming attrition advantage. This means that unless you have a list built like Owen's to take advantage of the MAZ creatures, you really need to do things like just put the boot incredibly hard into your opponent on turn 1 if you're going first, and kind of play this like you can play the Armory, for example, where you just don't interact with the scenario, and that's not really what you want a scenario like this to be doing. You don't want it to be disincentivizing action by the first player. But in practice, the first player's victory condition is an overwhelming attrition advantage, and so they are incentivized not to interact with the zones. What I would do instead is if you make the zones worth points, you get 2 things that are interesting. The first is that there are 3 zones, which means that the first player can, theoretically, get 3 points on the board by scanning all 3 zones on the first turn. Now, that is not going to be easy, but it is possible, and it is exactly balanced out by the fact that holding the Mothball at the end of the game is worth the same number of points. At that point, the game becomes a contest over who can use it more, and that's kind of interesting and dynamic. The other reason why I think I like doing it that way is that it actually gives both players the option, not necessarily the incentive, but the option to leave the MAZ creatures on the board. And one of the things we noticed in this game is that because where they are located is constrained to the inside of the zones, and the zones have to be accessible to players, much of the time, these MAZ creatures, they're just going to die as soon as they're placed. In Owen's case, he had a really clear plan to benefit from them being placed, because Norkias got juiced the hell up off of their precious Gribblies. But in practice, it's just going to be the first player who places them and then immediately kills them. If you make it the zones and not the MAZ creatures who are worth points, then you actually get kind of the interesting option to potentially leave the MAZ creatures there and make them, if you are the player who scanned the zone, you could have a situation where maybe you just leave the MAZ creature there and leave it to your opponent to solve that problem. If they're not worth points, it's a little bit of a tax you can ship your opponent's way. They could choose to do nothing and ship that back to you. It just gives you a little bit of a sub game, a sub dynamic that's potentially a bit more interesting than what we saw here, which is that each MAZ creature is involved in exactly one order in which it is killed, and then the game progresses. Overall, though, I do like this scenario. I think it wants a tiny little bit of tweaking to incentivize the first player to interact with zones a little bit more. But setting that aside, it created an environment where there was a bunch of back and forth. Things happened across the entire breadth of the table before we had the, oh, here it is, converge moment, where everyone kind of just pushed in towards the area that the mothball was in on the table, because it was never really going to move too far away from that. That created a nice big scrap. You had this big everyone run kind of moment where we were all pushing towards this one area of the table, reallocating force in a kind of interesting way, grabbing it and dropping it and having a scrap over it. I think one of the things that makes the scenario really work is the fact that the ball is ultimately constrained to the central area. If it wasn't, this would just be a smash and grab mission. I think they've done something really clever by having pretty clean rules to just make sure that no, you cannot ever get the mothball out of the exclusion zone. You are fighting over the exclusion zone. And it creates an environment where the line of play is almost like the cool things about Biotech 4. Because Biotech 4, just by the by, is a scenario that I secretly kind of like a little bit. People have had, like, everyone has had one rough experience with Biotech 4 and never wants to play it. But there's this really cool effect that happens in Biotech 4 where, because everyone has to rush to the center, you have these really interesting fights that you don't have in other games of Infinity. Right? Many people have been playing Infinity long enough to understand that moving forces forward puts those forces at risk because they're closer to your opponent's striking distance. And so when we think about like primer in tactical armored operations, how people use tactical armored gears, you do things like you move them forward, you move them back. You do the same things with linked teams. There's always this awareness that if you push a model too far forward, it's a one-way trip and you have to accept its loss. And so pulling back and making it difficult for your opponent to launch a counterattack, this is all an important part of Infinity. And that's fine, that's just good and interesting play, but getting a situation where everyone is forced to kind of like not pull back as much creates these interesting and scrappy knife fight situations that you don't get in other scenarios. Biotech Vor brute forces that by saying, no, you fuckers all have to move forward and sit in the center of the board. And so it creates an extreme version of the knife fight across the middle of the table kind of environment. Mothball produces it a little bit more organically, where neither player has the like Biotech Vor sword of Damocles over their head, but has to move to a part of the table that is invariably toward the center of the table in order to interact with the scenario. And so it accomplishes the same things that make Biotech Vor cool, but in a way that is exclusively up to the players to choose how to engage with and how to execute that. And that, I think, is really cool. The scenario could be refined a little bit. They asked me for some feedback when when they were first publishing it. I didn't get a chance to play it, just had a look at it. I would not have known, right? My own feedback on the scenario beyond this is interesting and is going to be a little bit messy in a good way. But regardless of whether or not you were to play it slightly modified or play it as is, it produces an interesting time without being really ham-fisted or anything. It produces a lot of interesting and organic moments where you are presented with choices, particularly once the mothball is live, that creates a cool play experience. So thumbs up. Now, just as a quick reminder, if you want the full rules for the Mothball scenario, if you want to see and participate in or check out the Mothball Incident unofficial global campaign, links to both of those things, or the campaign website generally, can be found in the pinned comment in the video below. It's run by A Tale of Miniatures and Dice. The unofficial campaign will be live from the 18th of July to the 17th of August. Go and check it out, and big thanks to those guys for supporting the channel in the past. As always, hope very much that you've enjoyed this. We'll be back next week with more Infinity content. Have yourselves a good week, and I will see you next time.